Please take a seat, state and spell your complete name.
My name is Ann Kistler Rao, ANNEKISLER-RAO.
What do you do for a living?
I'm employed with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Division of Forensic Sciences, also known as the State Crime Lab, and I'm employed as the technical leader of the Trace Evidence Section.
What is the Trace Evidence Section?
Trace Evidence Section analyzes small, often microscopic pieces of evidence, such as hairs, fibers, glass, paints, plastics, and fractured materials.
How long have you worked in that capacity?
I have been employed with the GBI Crime Lab for over 18 years. I've been the technical leader for over a year now.
Over what?
1 year now.
Okay. And as the technical leader, do you have certain additional responsibilities?
Yes. In addition to examining pieces of evidence, I'm also responsible for training other individuals in our section and coordinating the proficiency testing in our section and overseeing the analytical manuals.
Are you a microanalyst?
Yes, so part of my job is to perform duties as a microanalyst.
What is a microanalyst?
A microanalyst is someone who analyzes small, often microscopic pieces of evidence like the ones I mentioned, like hairs and fibers.
Would you describe to the court, please, your training and your education that qualifies you for your job?
I have a bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Pennsylvania. I have a master's degree in forensic science from John Jay College. With the GBI Crime Lab, I have completed extensive training programs in hairs, fibers, glass, plastics, paints, and fractured materials. I'm also certified by the American Board of Criminalistics in hair and fiber analysis.
In your career at the GBI, how many hair and fiber analyses have you conducted?
I think it's somewhere over 800 hair analysis and definitely over 150 fiber analysis.
Have you been qualified before as an expert in a courtroom in the field of microanalysis and hair comparisons?
Yes, I have.
Approximately how many times?
I've testified about 67 times within trace evidence, and I think hair was at least 35 of those.
Okay. And at this time, Your Honor, the state would move to tender Ms. Kistler Rao as an expert in the fields of microanalysis and hair comparisons.
Any objection?
No, sir.
The witness will be allowed to testify in those fields.
I'd like to turn your attention to your case number 2024-1005-107. Do you recognize that case number? Is that a case that you worked on at the GBI?
Yes, I do recognize that case number.
And who is the victim associated with that case number?
The victim is Laken Riley.
I'd like to ask you a few things about some of the tests that you did in this case. First of all, were you asked to examine some hairs that were removed from a jacket, which is your item 3 at the crime lab?
Yes, I was.
And what were you asked to do, and what did you observe about hairs, and how did you do it?
I was asked to compare question hairs that were removed from the jacket to the known head hair of Laken Riley. So in order to do this, I took the previously collected tape lifts of the jacket. I then removed question hairs from those tape lifts and mounted them on microscope slides. I did this using a stereo microscope, which is a low-powered microscope. I then I classified the hairs using the stereo microscope and also a higher-powered microscope as to if they're animal or human, what body area they came from, possible ancestry characteristics. I evaluated the root ends of those hairs, and I determined if they were suitable for a microscopical comparison. So typically we will compare head hairs and pubic hairs because they have more distinctive features. I then took the known head hair standard of Laken Riley and mounted that on separate microscope slides. So at this point, I compared the question hairs to the known head hair standard. And when I say known head hair standard, we like to have at least 25 hairs to encompass the entire range of features present on that person's head.
How many head hairs did you have from Lake and Riley from the jacket item 3? I'm sorry, how many head hairs did you have that you determined were consistent with Lake and Riley? Let's start with that.
So from the jacket, there were 29 hairs recovered from the jacket that I found to be microscopically consistent with the known head hair of Lake and Riley, meaning they either originated from her or someone else with hair possessing the same distinct characteristics.
Were you able to make a determination of those 29 hairs? Did any of them have roots?
Yes, they did.
And how many of the 29 did?
So to explain, when we're looking at hair roots, there are basically 3 growth phases. We have anagen hair roots, which are the actively growing growth phase. Those would be the hairs that you need some sort of force to remove from your head. Catagen is the transitional phase, and then telogen is the resting phase, where those would be your naturally shed hairs. So when I looked at the roots, and you can tell the difference by the morphology of the root. So when I looked at the roots, 21 of those hair roots were in the anagen phase, the actively growing phase. The remainder were either broken, and I think there were 2 that were in the resting phase, the telogen phase.
And were you able to form any type of conclusion about those 21 hairs and how they may have been removed from her head?
So because they were in the anagen phase, some sort of force was needed to remove those hairs.
So some sort of what?
Force.
Force, okay. And when you explained to us your conclusion that you reached, and I may have misstated it, so I want to make sure you stated it correctly. What was the conclusion that you reached on the 29 hairs from the jacket?
So the 29 hairs either originated from Lake and Riley or someone with hair possessing the same distinct characteristics.
And how were you able to determine that?
So in order to perform my comparison, basically the basic structure of a hair that you're looking at is the main body of the hair is called the cortex. That's where you find the pigment granules that give the hair its color. Running down the center of a hair is a tube-like structure called the medulla, which may or may not be present. And then running along the outside of the hair is a thin layer of scales called the cuticle. So in order for me to determine whether or not the questioned hairs are consistent with the known, I examine them using the stereo microscope, the low-powered microscope, and then I take them to a comparison microscope. So a comparison microscope is basically 2 microscopes that are connected together by an optical bridge, where I can put the questioned hairs on one side and the known hairs on the other side and see them at the same time under the same field of view. So when I look at the hairs, I'm examining features like the color of the hair, the pigment granules, the size of the pigment granules, the distribution of these pigment granules, the density of them. I'm looking at the medulla. Is it continuous? Is it broken up? Is it not even there? Is it translucent? Is it opaque? I'm looking at features like the scales and any other microscopic features that might be present. And I will compare those in the question hair to that in the known hair standard as I go from root to tip throughout the hair to determine whether or not the question hair falls within the range of the known.
And you did that for all of your hair comparisons in this case, that process that you just described?
Yes, I did.
And is that process that you just described a generally accepted or widely accepted method of comparing hairs in your scientific community?
Yes, it is.
And has it been, this method been published in relevant scientific journals?
Yes, it has.
And is it reproducible and reliable?
It is.
When doing your comparisons that you just explained to us, and I'm going to move on to other objects, but in doing it, my question is globally for all the hair comparisons that you did in this case, did you follow the GBI's protocols and procedures in conducting your tests?
Yes, I did.
And does the GBI have specific protocols and procedures in how you do your microscopic hair analysis and comparison?
Yes, we do.
Are you familiar with those?
Yes.
And do you in fact train people on those?
I do.
And did you follow those in this case?
Yes, I did.
I want to move on to rocks. Were you asked to look at hairs that were removed from 2 items, and I'm going to use your GBI numbers again. So for your case number 2024-100510, I want to refer your attention to 2 item numbers, and I'm talking your GBI item numbers, which would be items 2 and 3. Are items 2 and 3 rocks?
Actually, I think those were our items 22 and 23.
Yeah, sorry. 2 and 3 was the crime scene. Your item numbers 22 and 23, are those rocks from the crime scene?
Yes, they are.
And did you look at those hairs removed from those rocks from the crime scene?
I did.
And what were your results on that? Well, first of all, did you use the same process that you just described to us?
Yes, I did.
And what were your results?
I found off of one of the rocks there were 2 hairs, and off the other rock there were 27 hairs, all found to be microscopically consistent with the known head hair of Laken Riley, meaning they either originated from her or someone else with hair possessing the same distinct microscopic characteristics.
And finally, I want to ask you about a pair of underwear. Were you asked to examine Laken Riley's underwear that was removed at autopsy?
Yes, I was.
And what is your GBI item number for that item of evidence?
Our GBI item number is item 44B.
I am going to hand you what has already been admitted into evidence as State's Exhibit 321. And open the bag. I want to, yeah, go ahead. Yes. Do you recognize State's 321?
Yes, I do.
And do you see your unique GBI number associated with Laken Riley?
Yes, I do.
And do you see the item number for her underwear?
Yes.
Your GBI item number?
Yes, I do.
And do you see your initials too?
Yes.
Right. And did you examine that underwear, 321?
I did, yes.
And can you tell the court what you did to it?
So for the underwear, I was asked to determine if the damage was a cut or a tear. So I used the stereo microscope, which is the low-powered microscope, to look at the damage and evaluate the features of the damage to determine that.
Did you see, and I'm going to ask you to show it now, did you see damage to her underwear when you examined it?
Yes.
And how did you examine it?
Yes. So I looked visually and then also using that stereo microscope to examine it.
And the damage that you see, can you show the court the damage that you see?
The damage is right here.
In the middle of the underwear. And you were asked to determine what about this damage?
I was asked to determine if it was cut or torn.
How did you go about determining whether it was cut or torn?
I looked at features of the damage. So some of the features that we might observe in something that is torn would be a curling under of the fabric. You might see the yarn ends might be frayed of differing lengths, lying in a different plane, whereas something that is cut would more likely be straight yarn ends that are less frayed. And then also you might see stretching. Also with a knit fabric like this one, sometimes you can see rows of loops that make up the knit fabric remain still intact. With a torn fabric because they're being torn at the point of weakest structure, whereas with a cut fabric you might often see that those loops are cut straight through.
Did you perform your examination by using a microscope?
I did.
What were your conclusions?
I determined that this damage is consistent with having been torn.
May I have 1 moment, Your Honor?
Yes. You may cross-examine.
Good afternoon, ma'am. So let me ask you just a couple questions about the hair comparison that you testified about. Well, first of all, I heard you say that that the methods you use are published in scientific journals?
So the methods that we use are recognized throughout the scientific community as acceptable methods, and there is a standard published that describes the methods.
But that wasn't what Ms. Ross asked you, if their methods were published in scientific journals, and you said...
Scientific journals have been published that have used the same methods.
Could you point me to one?
Sure. There's one journal by Hauk and Boudoil that was discussing the discrimination of microscopical hair comparisons versus the results of mitochondrial hair comparisons.
What year was that?
I don't actually, I don't recall the exact year. It was Journal of Forensic Sciences.
Was there any, are you aware of any scientific publications outside of forensic sciences, like an academic science journal that has published a peer-reviewed article on hair comparison?
So most of the hair comparison articles are within forensic science journals that I am aware of.
And that is, those are the scientists like yourself who testify in court.
Some of them might testify in court.
But I mean, that's what forensic science is. It's right. It's the use of the application of science to legal investigation in the courtroom.
Yes, and there are people who work at universities who also work within the forensic science team.
Okay. I read about one FBI study from 2002. Are you familiar with that one?
Could you explain?
Well, it was the one where they found that in 80 cases that there was an 11% error rate based on the comparison that the microscopic hair examiners had compared against when the mitochondrial DNA was examined.
So that's actually the article that I mentioned. So yes, they did find that about 90% of the hair comparisons were in fact verified by a mitochondrial DNA exam. Of the ones that were not verified, a lot of them were more lightly colored blonde hairs that had less features for comparison.
But it did conclude that 11% of the examiners were wrong in that test.
I would not say wrong. That's just showing the limitations of this particular examination. So they did show that about 90%, they said about 11% were shown to be, did not actually support the microscopical comparison.
And so, but I'm not sure if I'm using this word right, the control there was the mitochondrial DNA testing.
They were just comparing basically the two examinations together to see what the results were from the mitochondrial DNA exams versus the microscopical.
You would agree that the mitochondrial DNA testing is going to be a lot more accurate than the hair comparison?
I would not say more accurate. So mitochondrial DNA also is not an absolute form of identification, and there is actually the potential for hair exams to distinguish individuals that mitochondrial DNA cannot.
And in a number of the hairs that you examined, the lab would have had the ability to go beyond the mitochondrial DNA testing to the full DNA profile testing.
So yes, there's sometimes potential for nuclear DNA testing.
And you even note that in your report that, hey, if you want to go further and either get other results that could confirm this test or eliminate Laken Riley as a potential donor of the hair, that DNA testing is available.
Yes, that's correct. That's possible.
That's all. Thank you.
What color was Laken Riley's hair?
May I refer to my notes? So I have it described as a medium brown, and then a lot of her hairs, the longer hairs, got lighter towards the tip of the hair.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Godwin?
No, sir.
Okay. Is she excused?
Yes, sir.
You're excused. We call your next witness.
The state calls Katrina Ostapovich.